The girl who knocked on a monster's gate. The night Amara Wells knocked on the vampire king's gate. She wasn't thinking about legends. She was thinking about medicine. About her mother shaking hands. About the fever that wouldn't break. And about how 5 silver coins could mean the difference between life and a grave no one would visit. Noctareth after sunset was not a place for children. Windows were bolted. Candles were blown out early. People crossed the street if they saw movement in the fog. The castle on the hill watched everything with silent stone eyes, and no one went near it unless they were summoned or suicidal. But Amara was 6 years old, hungry and out of options. Fear didn't weigh as much as love did. Her basket was filled with night-bloom roses, their petals dark as spilled wine, edges brushed in crimson. She had gathered them herself, pricking her fingers on thorns and whispering apologies to every broken stem. She had walked street after street, knocking on doors until her knuckles were red and raw. Most people didn't answer. Some told her to leave before the wrong kind noticed her. One woman muttered that the poor should know their place. Amara said thank you anyway. Her mother had taught her that bitterness was a luxury they couldn't afford, but kindness did not buy medicine. When she reached the top of the hill, the wind seemed to die completely, as if even the air refused to breathe near Valamont Castle. The iron gates towered above her, black and twisted with patterns shaped like thorns. Beyond them rose walls of gray stone wrapped in ivy. Gargoyles crouched along the edges like silent judges. The castle did not look evil. It looked eternal, cold, untouchable. Amara swallowed and stepped forward. Her fingers pressed against the rune carved into the gate. It burned with cold. Silence answered her at first. Then a voice rolled down from the stone like distant thunder. Who dares disturb my gates after dark? It was not shouted. It did not need to be. Amara forced her voice steady. My name is Amara, sir. I'm selling roses. They bloom at night. They're very fresh. A long pause followed, long enough for her hope to crack. How much? The voice finally asked. 3 for a silver coin. The whole basket for 5, she replied quickly. Please. The gates groaned. Slowly, heavily, they opened inward. King Darius Valamont stood there like a figure carved from winter. A black cloak draped over his broad shoulders, trimmed in gold thread that caught the moonlight. An iron crown rested on pale hair the color of frost-kissed wheat. His skin was unnaturally white, not sickly, but timeless. His eyes deep red, ancient fixed on her as if measuring something he did not understand. He did not look hungry. He looked exhausted. I will buy them all, he said. His voice was lower now, closer. All of them? Amara asked, startled. Yes. His gaze lingered on her thin arms, her trembling fingers. When did you last eat? Her stomach betrayed her with a sharp growl. Heat rushed to her face. Something changed in his expression. Not softness. Not yet. But something that resembled restraint. Come inside, he said. You will eat first. Then I will pay you. Every warning her mother had ever given her screamed in her ears. Never enter a stranger's home. Never trust stories about kings who do not age. But her mother was burning with fever. And this man, this monster everyone feared, had not once looked at her. With cruelty, she stepped through the gate. The courtyard was silent, frozen around a dry fountain. Black roses climbed the walls like living shadows. The massive doors opened with a deep echo, and Amara entered the castle. It was vast. Chandeliers of iron and crystal burned with steady flames. Marble floors reflected her small figure. Tapestries told stories of war and crowns in forgotten eras. Wealth shimmered everywhere, but warmth did not. The castle felt hollow, like something beautiful that had forgotten how to live. Wait here, Darius said, gesturing to a carved chair near the entrance. Amara nodded and sat carefully. Her eyes wandered, and then she saw it, a massive portrait near the staircase, framed in gold carved with roses and crescent moons. The woman in the painting wore midnight silk and silver embroidery. Her pale hair flowed over her shoulders. Her expression was gentle, hopeful, alive. Amara stood slowly, heart pounding. She walked closer. Her breath caught. "That's my mom," she whispered. Behind her, something fragile trembled in the king's hands. And in that silent hall of stone and shadow, 3 innocent words shattered a secret buried for centuries. Asterisk. The portrait that should not exist, the words hung in the air like a blade that had already been swung. "That's my mom." Amara did not say it with fear or accusation. She said it with simple certainty, like a child identifying the sky. But in the vast silence of Valamont Castle, those 3 words struck harder than any weapon. King Darius stood a few steps behind her, a silver tray balanced in his hands, bread and fruit untouched. For a fraction of a second, the immortal ruler looked less like a king and more like a man who had just seen a ghost step out of memory. The glass on the tray trembled faintly, catching candlelight and fracturing it into shards of reflection across the marble floor. He crossed the distance between them with unnatural speed, setting the tray aside with a sharp sound that echoed far too loudly in the hall. "Her name," he said carefully, his voice measured, controlled, "was Lillian." "Is," Amara corrected softly, lifting her chin. "Her name is Lillian. She's not dead. She's sick, but she's alive." The correction struck deeper than she knew. Darius stared at the portrait, at the painted version of the woman he had loved, the woman who had vanished before dawn 6 years ago without a single goodbye. The artist had captured her exactly as he remembered her quiet strength, the defiance hidden beneath kindness, the way her eyes always seemed to search for something better than the world allowed. But he had buried that memory long ago. He had forced himself to believe she chose to leave. It had been easier than believing something worse. Now a child stood beneath that painting, pale hair catching the candlelight in almost the same way. Storm-gray eyes filled with unshakable certainty. "Come with me," Darius said at last, his tone shifting from shock to something colder and more deliberate. "We need to speak somewhere private." He led her through a corridor lined with ancient banners and into a smaller chamber warmed by a single fireplace. The room smelled of old books and stone, not dust, but time itself. He gestured for her to sit and pushed the tray toward her. Amara did not hesitate this time. Hunger overruled caution, and she ate with the quiet desperation of someone who had learned not to waste opportunities. Darius watched her carefully, studying the tilt of her head, the stubborn set of her jaw. Every small movement echoed something painfully familiar. "Tell me about your mother," he said. Amara swallowed and wiped her hands on her dress. "She helps people, even when they don't pay. She makes medicine from herbs and roots and flowers. People say she's too kind, but she says kindness is stronger than fear." Her voice trembled slightly at the last word. "She's been sick for weeks, and she doesn't remember things from before I was born. She says her memories only go back 6 years. 6 years." The number landed heavily in the room. The same year Lillian disappeared without a trace. The same year he had searched forests, villages, even rival territories, until pride and grief forced him to stop. "She doesn't remember?" Darius asked quietly. "No, just me." "And this?" Amara reached beneath her collar and pulled out a small silver locket resting against her chest. "She says she woke up with it. She doesn't know who gave it to her." Darius's breath stilled. He recognized the design instantly, 2 crescents entwined around a single star. He had commissioned it himself. It had been meant as a promise. His voice lowered, losing its edge of command. I gave her that. Amara looked at him carefully now, no longer just a frightened child, but something steadier. You knew her. Darius turned toward the fire, shadows cutting across his pale face. I loved her. The admission did not echo. It did not need to. It settled between them like truth finally spoken aloud. And for the first time in centuries, the vampire king realized the past he buried was not dead, it was sitting across from him, holding a locket he once meant as a vow. The secret the council buried, the fire in the chamber burned low, casting restless shadows against the stone walls as silence stretched between them. Darius stood motionless for several long seconds, staring at the silver locket in Amara's small hand, as though it were a relic pulled from a grave. He remembered the night he had given it to Lillian, beneath a sky thick with stars, remembered the way she had laughed softly when he tried to sound formal and royal instead of honest and afraid. That locket had been a promise of forever. Yet 6 years ago she had vanished before dawn, leaving only confusion and rumors behind. He had convinced himself she chose a mortal life over an immortal one. It had hurt less than believing something darker. Now the pieces no longer felt accidental. They felt arranged. 6 years, he murmured. More to himself than to Amara. She disappeared 6 years ago. That's when I was born, Amara said quietly. The truth settled in the room like smoke that refused to clear. Darius turned slowly toward her, his ancient eyes no longer distant but sharp and searching. He studied her face more closely now, noticing details he had dismissed before. The faint curve of her cheekbones, the quiet intensity in her gaze, the strange steadiness in a child so young. She did not shrink beneath his scrutiny. She simply watched him back. She never spoke of my father, Amara added, twisting her fingers together. When I ask, she just looks sad, like something hurts that she can't name. Pain tightened across Darius's expression. He had once believed love was his greatest weakness. Now he understood ignorance had been worse. Your mother did not leave me, he said at last, his voice losing its usual command. She would never have gone without a word. Before Amara could respond, hurried footsteps echoed in the corridor. The chamber door opened abruptly, and Renz, the castle's thin, nervous steward, stepped inside with visible hesitation. His normally composed posture had fractured. Sweat beaded along his brow. He bowed quickly, but did not meet the king's eyes. Your Majesty, the council has sent word, Renz said carefully. Elder Marcellus himself rides at midnight. They demand audience. Let them come, Darius replied without turning. There is more, Renz swallowed. I have kept silent for too long. His gaze flickered toward Amara, then back to the king. 6 years ago, the council began watching Lady Lillian. They believed she carried something dangerous. Darius moved so quickly, the air itself seemed to recoil. In a single motion, he seized Renz by the collar and lifted him from the ground. Dangerous how? His voice had lost all softness. A prophecy, Renz choked out. Of a child born between mortal and immortal blood. A bridge between worlds. Elder Marcellus believed such a child would threaten the council's authority. He ordered her removal. Removal, Darius repeated, the word heavy with restrained fury. They took her, Renz whispered. Stripped her memories so she could not lead you back to her. They left her alive to raise the child quietly, hidden in poverty where no one would think to look. The chamber felt smaller suddenly, the air thicker. Amara stood very still, absorbing words that reshaped her entire existence. They did that because of me? She asked softly. Darius released Renz, who crumpled to the floor gasping. The king turned slowly toward Amara, and for the first time she saw something raw in his ancient face, not power, not anger, but regret sharpened into resolve. They did it because they feared what you might become. The fire snapped loudly in the silence that followed. Outside, somewhere in the vast corridors of Valemont, a raven cried against the night, and the sound felt less like a warning and more like the beginning of a war long overdue. And as the truth settled into stone and flame, the vampire king understood one thing with terrifying clarity. The council had not stolen his love by accident. They had stolen her to prevent the birth of something greater than Asterisk, the child of twilight. The revelation did not break Amara the way Darius expected. She did not cry or collapse beneath the weight of prophecy and betrayal. She stood quietly in the firelight, her small fingers still wrapped around the silver locket, and absorbed the truth with a steadiness that unsettled even the immortal king. Outside the chamber windows, the wind began to rise, brushing against the stone like distant whispers. Darius could feel it in the air, the shift of fate tightening its grip. If the council feared her enough to erase Lillian's memories, then they believed the prophecy was more than myth. And prophecies, in his world, were never harmless stories. "There is something you need to see," Darius said finally, his voice regaining its measured strength. He extended his hand, not as a ruler commanding obedience, but as a man asking trust. After a brief hesitation, Amara placed her hand in his. His skin was cool, but not cruel. Together they left the chamber and descended into the oldest wing of the castle, a place few entered willingly. The air there carried the scent of parchment and ancient ink. Shelves stretched toward the vaulted ceiling, filled with volumes older than kingdoms. At the center stood a single obsidian table beneath a circle of low-burning candles. Darius unlocked a glass case with a key he wore around his neck and withdrew a weathered book bound in dark leather. Its cover bore a symbol of intertwined crescents surrounding a star. He placed it gently on the table. "This was written before the council existed," he said. "Before fear ruled our kind." He opened the book to a page marked in faded crimson ink. "Read this?" Amara climbed onto a nearby chair and traced the unfamiliar words with her finger. Though the language was ancient, she found she could understand it, as if it had been waiting for her voice. "When mortal blood and deathless blood join beneath the moon," she read slowly, "a child of twilight shall rise, neither fully bound tonight nor captive today. This bridge-born shall carry 3 marks, the touch that awakens what sleeps, the flesh unburned by flame, and the will that breaks command. In her rising, the lords of shadow shall face the dawn." The chamber felt colder after the words were spoken. Amara looked up. "That's just a story." Darius did not answer directly. Instead, he reached toward one of the candles and nodded. "Touch it." She frowned, but extended her hand carefully into the flame. The fire curved around her fingers like silk, warm but not painful. She did not flinch. Darius's jaw tightened. "My kind burns," he said quietly. "You do not." He then handed her a silver letter opener from the table. Silver had always weakened vampires, poisoning their flesh. Amara held it without discomfort. Finally, Darius guided her toward a withered plant in a clay pot by the wall, a night bloom long dead from neglect. "Touch this." Amara pressed her fingertips to the brittle stem. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the plant shuddered. Color rushed back into its leaves, and a deep crimson bud unfurled before their eyes, opening toward the dim candlelight as if greeting sunrise. Amara gasped and stepped back. The bloom remained alive. "The 3 marks," Darius whispered, awe and dread woven together in his voice. "Flame does not harm you. Silver does not weaken you. And life answers your touch." He knelt before her slowly, not as a king acknowledging a subject, but as something more fragile, a father confronting truth. They were not afraid of what you might destroy. They were afraid of what you might change. Amara's voice trembled for the first time. "Does that make me a monster?" Darius shook his head. No, it makes you something new. In the silence that followed, the revived flower swayed gently as if breathing. And somewhere beyond the castle walls, the council was already moving. For the first time in centuries, the vampire king realized the future was no longer written in fear. It was standing before him, small and fearless, with starlight waiting to ignite in her hands. Blood answers blood. The revived flower had barely finished unfolding when the castle itself seemed to exhale a warning. A deep tremor rolled through the eastern walls, subtle but unmistakable, like stone remembering an old enemy. Darius rose instantly, every trace of awe replaced by sharpened instinct. He could feel them now, multiple presences approaching under the cover of night, disciplined and deliberate. The council had not waited for midnight. They had decided to act before he could prepare. Amara sensed the shift as well. She did not panic. She stepped closer to him, her small hand brushing his cloak as if grounding herself in something steady. "Stay beside me," Darius said quietly, and for the first time the command carried not authority, but fear. The first explosion struck the outer courtyard moments later. Stone cracked. Distant shouts echoed through the corridors. The scent of smoke drifted faintly into the library. Guards rushed past the doorway, weapons drawn, eyes burning with urgency. "Your Majesty, the eastern gate has been breached." Council insignia confirmed. Darius did not curse. He did not rage. He simply moved. His sword slid free with a metallic whisper that filled the chamber like a promise. "They come for her," he said, more to himself than anyone else. Amara looked at the glowing star-shaped mark, still faintly pulsing in her palm, a reminder of the blood that had answered her own. "Will they hurt Mama?" she asked. The question struck deeper than any blade. Darius turned toward her, the fury in his eyes tempered by resolve. "Not while I stand." Another violent tremor shook the castle. The fight had reached the inner courtyard. Steel clashed against steel, and the sound reverberated like thunder trapped within stone walls. Darius guided Amara quickly toward the grand hall, where torches flared brighter as if responding to her presence. He intended to move the portrait of Lillian to a safer chamber, to protect the last visible link to the woman they had stolen. But fate intervened in a way neither of them expected. As Darius lifted the massive frame from its hooks, one gilded edge caught against the stone bracket. The sudden resistance sliced across his palm. Dark crimson blood welled instantly, vivid against his pale skin. A single drop fell, spinning in the candlelight like a falling star. Amara reacted without thinking. She reached out and caught it in her open hand. "Don't," Darius began, horror flashing across his face. Vampire blood was poison to mortals, corrosive as acid. He had seen it burn through flesh. He had seen warriors scream. Amara did not scream. The blood touched her skin and changed. Instead of burning, it cooled, spreading across her palm in delicate silver lines that formed a perfect five-pointed star. The mark glowed softly, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. Every torch in the hall flared higher at once, flames bending toward her as though bowing to something ancient. Darius descended the steps in 2 strides and knelt before her, his wounded hand forgotten. He cradled her small palm in both of his, staring at the mark as though witnessing a miracle. "Blood answers blood," he whispered, voice breaking with disbelief. "It is undeniable." Amara met his gaze. "Does that mean you're really my father?" The question held no accusation, only hope. "Yes," Darius said softly. "It means we are bound by more than prophecy. We are bound by truth." Before the moment could settle, a steward rushed into the hall, breathless and pale. "Your Majesty, the council's forces have retreated, but only to regroup. They know the child carries your blood. If you claim her openly, they will strike at Lillian first." The threat hung heavy in the air. Darius rose slowly, expression transforming from shock to iron resolve. Then we bring Lillian here under royal protection. Tonight. Outside, the battle noise faded into tense silence. Inside, something far more powerful had awakened. And as the star on her palm glowed brighter against the shadows, the vampire king understood that war had already begun, and this time, he would not lose the family fate had returned to him. Asterisk the dawn that broke the night. By the following midnight, Valamont Castle no longer felt like a tomb of silence. It felt like a court awaiting judgment. Torches blazed along the grand hall, their flames steady but restless, reflecting against polished marble like trapped lightning. Every noble within a night's ride had answered the summons. Cloaks of black and crimson filled the chamber. Silver insignias of rank shimmered beneath cold chandeliers. At the center stood the throne of iron and stone, crowned with thorns that symbolized rule through fear. But Darius did not sit upon it. He stood before it, one hand resting lightly on Amara's shoulder. She wore a simple midnight blue dress provided by the castle, and the star-shaped mark on her palm glowed faintly beneath the candlelight. Behind them, Lillian Wells had finally arrived under heavy escort, pale from illness but unbroken, her storm-gray eyes scanning the hall with fragile confusion. The great doors opened with a heavy echo, and Elder Marcellus entered, as though the night itself had shaped him from frost. Tall, gaunt, draped in white council robes edged with silver, he carried the cold certainty of a man who believed himself righteous. The hall parted for him, some bowing, others watching with hidden doubt. "You invoked ancient law," Marcellus said smoothly. "This better justify the disruption of order." "It does," Darius replied, voice calm but edged like drawn steel. "I invoke trial by truth." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Trial by truth was older than the council, a binding covenant where lies turned to ash upon the speaker's tongue. Magic stirred in the air as the ancient oath took hold. Marcellus's eyes narrowed, but he nodded. "I acknowledge it." Darius stepped forward. 6 years ago, Lillian Wells was taken. Her memories were stripped. She was hidden in poverty to conceal the existence of her child. Under oath, tell this court, did you order it? The hall held its breath. Marcellus opened his mouth. "I acted for the protection of our kind." Gray ash spilled from his lips instead of words. The magic of the covenant flared bright. Gasps echoed around the chamber. Marcellus clutched at his throat, fury cracking through his composure. The truth had judged him. Amara stepped forward before fear could reach her. "You were scared," she said, her voice clear despite her sighs. "Scared that something new would change what you built." Marcellus lunged without warning, drawing a thin silver blade from his robes. Chaos erupted. Nobles shouted. Guards moved. Lillian cried out. But before steel could reach flesh, vines burst from the cracks in the marble floor. Night-bloom roses erupted in a violent circle around Amara, thorns sharp as daggers, pinning Marcellus mid-strike. The hall fell into stunned silence as the ancient castle responded to her blood. Darius stepped forward, sword drawn, stopping inches from Marcellus's throat. "By ancient law and your own violation of this covenant, I have the right to end you." Marcellus smiled bitterly through ash-stained lips. "Then prove you are still the monster they fear." The hall waited. Darius lowered his blade. "No, fear ends tonight." He stripped Marcellus of title and authority, sentencing him to exile beyond the northern wastes. Guards dragged the disgraced elder away as whispers of disbelief filled the chamber. Then Darius turned not to the nobles, but to Amara. Slowly, deliberately, he knelt before her. A king had not knelt in centuries. "Amara Wells," he said quietly, "do you choose to stand with me, not by prophecy, but by will?" Amara looked at her mother. Lillian's memories had returned moments earlier when the compulsion shattered, and tears now traced her face as understanding dawned fully. She nodded. "I choose," Amara said firmly. The star on her palm flared brilliant gold. High above, stained glass that had never opened shifted with a groan. A narrow seam split, and the first ribbon of sunrise spilled into the hall. The vampires flinched, but the light did not burn. It warmed. It illuminated without. Destroying hope filled the space where fear once ruled. Darius rose beside his daughter and addressed the court. "From this night forward, this kingdom will not be ruled by fear, but by covenant. Mortal and immortal will share one sky." Outside, dawn climbed over Valamont for the first time in centuries. And as sunlight touched stone without turning it to ash, the kingdom realized the prophecy had never promised destruction. It had promised a new beginning.